In the year 1844, a young German biblical scholar was visiting one of the most remote and ancient monasteries on Earth, a stone fortress nestled at the foot of a holy mountain in the middle of the Sinai Desert. While working in the monastery's legendary library, he noticed a large wastebasket filled with old, discarded pages of parchment. The librarian casually remarked that it was rubbish and that two similar baskets of this old material had already been used to fuel the monastery's ovens. The scholar, with a sickening feeling of dread, asked to look at the pages. As he pulled out a leaf of the ancient manuscript, his blood ran cold. He realized he was not holding trash. He was holding a page from what was, at that time, the oldest known copy of the Greek Bible in the world, and he had just rescued it from being turned to ash. This was the beginning of a decades-long quest, a story of discovery, intrigue, and bitter controversy, all centered around a single, priceless book that would come to be known as the Codex Sinaiticus. But before we start our story, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any of our new, incredible stories. To understand the monumental significance of this discovery, we must first journey to the place where it was made, a location sacred to three world religions: the Sinai Peninsula. This is a stark, breathtaking, and deeply spiritual landscape of rugged, granite mountains and vast, empty deserts. And at its heart is Mount Sinai, the holy mountain known in the Old Testament as the place where Moses received the Ten Commandments directly from God. At the very foot of this sacred mountain lies one of the most remarkable and enduring outposts of Christianity in the world, the sacred monastery of the God, Trodden Mount Sinai, more commonly known as St. Catherine's Monastery. Founded in the 6th century by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian the Great, it is one of the oldest continuously operating Christian monasteries on the planet. For over 1,500 years, its high, fortress-like stone walls have protected its community of monks from raiders, empires, and the ravages of time. But the monastery's greatest treasure was not its icons or its relics, it was its library. For centuries, the monks of St. Catherine's were dedicated scribes and scholars. In an age before the printing press, they painstakingly copied and preserved thousands of ancient and medieval manuscripts. Because of its extreme isolation and its continuous history, the monastery's library became a time capsule, a repository of texts that had been lost everywhere else in the world. It holds the second largest collection of early codices and manuscripts in the world, second only to the Vatican Library. It is a place of immense historical importance, but in the 19th century, much of its collection was still uncatalogued, and its true treasures were largely unknown to the outside world. It was this legendary, mysterious library that drew our story's protagonist into the heart of the desert. Our protagonist is a German biblical scholar named Constantine von Tishonorf. Born in 1815, Tishonorf was a brilliant, ambitious, and deeply devout man. He dedicated his entire life to one single, all-consuming quest to establish the most accurate and authentic possible text of the New Testament. In the 19th century, this was a task of immense scientific and religious importance. The printing press had made the Bible widely available, but the Greek text it was based on was a version that had been compiled in the 16th century from relatively recent medieval manuscripts. Tishonorf and other scholars knew that over centuries of being copied by hand, small errors, omissions, and additions had crept into the text. He believed that the only way to get back to the original, authentic words of the apostles was to find the oldest possible manuscripts, those that were closest in time to when the New Testament was actually written. This belief sent him on a series of arduous and often dangerous journeys across Europe and the Near East. He traveled to the great libraries of Paris, London, and Rome, but his real hope lay in the remote, ancient monasteries of the East, places like St. Catherine's. He believed that in the dry, stable climates of the desert and within the ancient walls of these isolated communities, there might still exist, forgotten and untouched, manuscripts from the 4th or 5th centuries, 1,000 years older than the texts that were currently being used. In Old 44, on his first major expedition, the 29-year-old Tishonorf finally arrived at St. Catherine's Monastery after a long and difficult journey across the Sinai Desert by camel. He was welcomed by the monks and granted access to their fabled library. He spent several days examining the manuscripts, and while he found many important texts, he had not yet found the great ancient Bible codex he dreamed of. Then, the moment of discovery arrived, and it was a scene of both horror and elation. As he was working in the main library hall, he noticed a large basket filled with loose, disorganized sheets of parchment. He asked the librarian what it was. The librarian replied that it was rubbish, old pages that were scheduled to be used as kindling to start the monastery's ovens, and that 2 similar baskets had already been burned. A sickening feeling of dread came over Tishonorf. With a feigned air of casual curiosity, he asked to look at the rubbish. He reached into the basket and pulled out a page. His heart stopped. He was an expert in paleography, the study of ancient handwriting. He knew, in an instant, what he was holding. The script was an ancient, beautiful Greek uncial, the style of writing used in the earliest centuries of the Christian Church. The pages were from a copy of the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament. He instantly recognized it as one of the oldest manuscripts he had ever seen, perhaps the oldest in the world. He had just rescued 43 priceless pages of a 1,500-year-old Bible from being destroyed forever. Barely able to conceal his excitement, he was given permission by the monks to keep these worthless pages. He warned them that these pages were far too valuable to be used as fuel, but he did not yet reveal their true, world-altering significance. He knew, with an absolute burning certainty, that the rest of this incredible ancient book must still exist, hidden somewhere within the ancient walls of the monastery, and he vowed that he would one day return to find it. Constantine von Tishonorf left St. Catherine's Monastery in 1844 with the 43 rescued pages of parchment clutched in his hands. To him, they were a treasure more valuable than any gold. He published his findings, and the academic world was electrified by the existence of such an ancient and important manuscript. But for Tishonorf, the discovery was an agonizing, incomplete victory. He was haunted by the knowledge of the pages that had already been burned, and obsessed by the thought of the hundreds of other pages that, he was convinced, must still be hidden somewhere within the monastery's walls. He dedicated the next decade of his life to securing the funding and the political influence he would need to return. He made a second, frustrating trip in 1853, but the monks, now more wary and aware of the value of their manuscripts, showed him nothing new. The Great Codex remained hidden. His final triumphant return came in 1859. This time, he arrived not just as a poor scholar, but as an agent of a powerful patron, Tsar Alexander II of Russia. The Tsar, as the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, was seen as the great protector of Eastern Christianity, and Tishonorf had convinced him that recovering the world's oldest Bible would be an immense victory for the faith and the Russian Empire. But even with the Tsar's backing, his third visit was initially a failure. He spent weeks at the monastery, searching the library again, but found no trace of the manuscript. His mission had failed. Dejected, he packed his bags and gave the monks his instructions for his departure by camel the next morning. That evening, in a scene that would become legendary, Tishonorf was walking in the monastery grounds when he struck up a conversation with the monastery's steward. As they talked, the steward invited the scholar back to his private cell for some refreshments. Casually, the steward remarked that he, too, had been reading an old copy of the Septuagint. He then walked over to a corner of his cell, and from a shelf, he brought out a large object wrapped in a simple red cloth. He placed it on the table. Tishonorf, with a feigned air of indifference, unwrapped the bundle. As the cloth fell away, his heart stopped. It was not just a few pages. It was a massive, near-complete volume. He instantly recognized the same beautiful, ancient Greek script he had seen 15 years earlier in the wastebasket. He was looking at the rest of the manuscript. It contained not only a huge portion of the Old Testament, but also the entire New Testament. Tishonorf, in his own diary, described how he had to retreat to his own room that night, overcome with a joy so intense it felt like a religious ecstasy. He stayed up all night, carefully transcribing one of the texts, feeling as though he was in the presence of something sacred. The quest was over. He had found it. But the discovery of the manuscript was only the beginning of the story's most contentious and controversial chapter, the story of how it left the monastery. And here, there are two profoundly different versions of the truth. According to Tishonorf's own account, he spent months painstakingly transcribing the manuscript at the monastery. He then persuaded the monks that it would be a grand gesture of faith to gift the priceless codex to its great protector, the Tsar of Russia. In exchange, He promised that the Tsar would use his immense influence to protect the monastery and provide it with much-needed financial support. Tischendorf's version is a story of a noble transaction, a gift from the monks to their powerful patron for the good of all Christendom. The monks of St. Catherine's Monastery, however, tell a very different and much darker story. They maintain to this day that they were tricked and that the Codex was, in essence, stolen. They say they never agreed to gift the manuscript. They claim they only agreed to loan it to Tischendorf, allowing him to take it to Russia so that a perfect copy could be made with the clear and explicit understanding that it would then be returned to its rightful home in their library. They have produced receipts and letters from the time, including a formal receipt signed by Tischendorf and the Russian consul, which they say proves the transaction was a loan, not a permanent transfer. They argue that Tischendorf, backed by the immense power of the Russian Empire, simply never returned their property. It is a bitter controversy that continues to this day, a story of academic ambition colliding with colonial-era power dynamics and the exploitation of a trusting and isolated community. Regardless of how it was acquired, the Codex Sinaiticus, as it came to be known, was taken to St. Petersburg, Russia. It was celebrated as a national treasure and became the crown jewel of the Imperial Library. And there it remained for several decades. Then, history intervened once more. After the Bolshevik Revolution, the new atheistic Soviet Union had little use for a Christian holy book, but it was in desperate need of cash. In 1933, in a move that shocked the world, the government of Joseph Stalin sold the priceless Codex Sinaiticus to the British Museum in London for the immense sum of £100,000. The money was raised through a massive public fundraising campaign in Great Britain, with ordinary citizens donating what they could to save the historic manuscript for the nation. Today, the majority of the Codex Sinaiticus resides in a climate-controlled vault at the British Library in London, where it is considered one of the greatest treasures of Western civilization. The other parts are scattered, with the 43 pages Tischendorf first rescued in Leipzig, Germany, other fragments in St. Petersburg, and a handful of pages that were discovered in the monastery itself in the 1970s. Its importance cannot be overstated. It is, along with another ancient manuscript called the Codex Vaticanus, one of the two oldest Bibles in the world, and it is the only known complete copy of the New Testament from this early 4th century period. It even contains two books, the Shepherd of Hermas and the Epistle of Barnabas, that are not part of the modern New Testament canon. It is a direct, physical link to the formative years of Christianity. The story of its discovery is a profound legacy, a tale of a scholar's obsessive faith and a monastery's incredible dedication to preservation. But it is also a difficult and uncomfortable story about the complex ethics of discovery and the lingering wounds of cultural appropriation.